NATO Collective Defense Article 5. The NATO Collective Defense Treaty is meant to protect all members of NATO against an enemy incursion, no matter who it's against. The members of NATO are bound together, committing themselves to the defense of the whole. In the simplest terms, an attack against one member of NATO is an attack against every member of NATO. This particular notion is spelled out in its entirety in the Washington Treaty, Article 5. At the end of World War II, the situation in Europe called for a better defensive strategy for democratic nations. Communist movements in Europe, supported by the Soviet Union, culminated in the Czechoslovakian overthrow, effectively ending the democratically elected government therein. Not long after, the Soviet Union stepped up involvement in Germany, blockading the Allies' attempts to secure a position within the struggling German nation, weary after the punishments of World War II. As such, in April of 1949, 12 nations came together to form NATO. Those 12 nations are the United States, Canada, Great Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Luxembourg, Italy, Iceland, and Portugal. Article 5 was the linchpin of the treaty, ensuring a collective defensive response to any attack on a NATO ally. The primary objective was to create a pact of mutual assistance against the risk of the growing Soviet Union. Within the treaty that the NATO members drew up was Article 5, specifically relating to the military assistance that would be provided should the Soviet Union seek to expand its Eastern European holdings. Article 6 serves to complement Article 5, reinforcing the use of military might should an invasion of any NATO member occur. In the event of Article 5 being invoked, NATO members provide any assistance they can. It is an individual obligation of each ally, with each remaining in control of their own contribution. Even though Article 5 allows for military assistance, it does not require it. Sanctions, embargoes, and various other measures of aid can be deployed as well. Each member of NATO will consult every other member, with the end goal being to restore the security of the treaty. At the onset of Article 5, a disagreement erupted between the European participants and the United States, with Europe wanting to guarantee that any attacks made against them would immediately bring America to their defense. The US, however, did not want to commit to this, and required this be reflected in Article 5, essentially ensuring that they were not obligated to intervene with military deployment against any incursions against NATO allies. Despite the setup against the Soviet Union and the United States' insistence that they not be the ultimate trump card against European incursion, the first and only instance of Article 5 being invoked was following the 9/11 attacks against the US. Within 24 hours of the attack, NATO allies invoked Article 5 to assist. NATO agreed that if the attack could be proven to have come from abroad, it would stand with the United States in whatever actions followed. On October 4th, when it was determined that the attack had indeed come from abroad, NATO put together an 8-part package to assist the United States in their newfound war on terror. From October 2001 to May 2002, NATO launched its first ever anti-terror operation, Eagle Assist, in accordance with the NATO Collective Defense Article 5. 7 NATO radar aircraft were deployed to patrol the skies over the United States, with 830 crew members across 13 NATO countries represented in the operation. NATO's involvement carried over into Operation Active Endeavor. NATO's standing naval forces were deployed to patrol the eastern Mediterranean, monitoring shipping in an attempt to stifle suspected terrorist activity within shipping lanes. A year later, the operation was expanded to include the entire shipping industry in the Mediterranean. While the aftermath of 9/11 was the first instance of a collective NATO armed response, it was not the first time that NATO put collective defense measures in place. In 1991, at the request of Turkey during the Gulf War, NATO deployed Patriot missiles in assistance of Turkish forces. During the crisis in Iraq, a similar measure was put into place in 2003 in Operation Display Deterrence, and in 2012, the situation in Syria was met with a nearly identical response, again on behalf of Turkish forces engaged in the conflict. Regardless of individual events triggering a response, NATO always has a standing action-ready defensive network, including a NATO Response Force, or NRF, composed of armed forces from all allied nations. NRF forces are permanently deployed along hotbeds of activity, as well as maritime forces in allied and international waters. NATO also has an established air defense system to protect against missile and aircraft attacks, and is constantly policing the air around NATO allied nations, particularly around members who don't have their own air force. These patrols are engaged on a rolling basis, without fail, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The invocation of Article 5, NATO's collective defense, increased in 2014 with Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, in tandem with the expanded ISIL campaigns across several continents. The collective NRF has tripled in size. The spearhead force within the NRF has been established, and detachments of NRF have been actively deployed in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The biggest deployment was made in Romania, and the assistance in Eastern Europe ramped up even higher with the addition of air patrolling over the Baltic and Black Sea regions, all in anticipation of Putin's expanded interest in annexing Eastern European territories. All the while, NATO's joint intelligence ventures continue to keep tabs on potential conflicts brought on by Russian incursion. The full bandwidth of what Article 5 is responsible for has continued to expand in recent years, adding new technological fronts that can't necessarily be countered by the deployment of the NRF. In 2016, at the Warsaw Summit, NATO recognized cyber defense as a new front that needed collective defending, just like anti-terrorism forces and universal allied air coverage. In 2019, NATO reached an agreement to include outer space as an operational domain of collective NATO action. The vague phrasing of Article 5, however, makes it unclear to what extent a cyber attack counts as an armed attack against another NATO member. The 2007 cyber warfare in Estonia, which targeted the state's parliament, banks, and other institutions, did not meet the threshold, nor did the 2017 NotPetya cyber attack of Ukraine, which spread to NATO members and has cost billions of dollars in damages. NATO, and in particular Article 5, came under heat from United States President Donald Trump in 2017 when he referred to the treaty as obsolete. Arguing more aggressively than President Bush and Obama, he continued to repeat that NATO was not spending enough on the defense of its members. Yet not long after, Trump reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to Article 5 and the collective defense of all NATO allies, a commitment that has been reasserted by newly elected President Joe Biden. Following Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in 2022, NATO took active steps to defend all NATO members bordering on the conflict. While Ukraine is not a member of NATO, neighboring nations like Poland have seen an increase in NRF presence, as well as active military drills in preparation of any further Russian incursions. Thousands of troops have been deployed along Russian borders, including the United States' armed forces sent by President Joe Biden. On February 2nd, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby reaffirmed that the United States remains firmly committed to NATO, and specifically to Article 5. And on March 24, 2022, NATO leaders even agreed to increase their defensive capabilities to prevent incidents like this from happening in the future. The missile that killed 2 people in November 2022 in Poland stoked fears of further military escalation in the Ukraine war, but this was downplayed as an accident. Despite the Kremlin's threats, President Zelensky has asked NATO for Ukraine's membership to be accelerated. 9 NATO nations from Central and Eastern Europe approved such a proposition, while America and NATO Secretary General believe the priority should be given to sending military support. With spring 2023 beckoning new Ukrainian and Russian front offenses, more Western armor deliveries to Ukraine, and Russia continuing to play the victim, the weight of the words written 70 years ago in Washington grows heavier by the day.